Hey everybody, I mentioned Jim Steranko in the last feed, so I thought I would do a little reading from his media scene in his voice as best as I can. I'm just going to read all the way through, and there's probably going to be fuck ups in there because I can't read, but I hope you guys will enjoy Media Scene, issue 37, May, June 1979. Publisher and editor, Jim Steranko. Several weeks ago, I went back to school at the invitation of my good friend, Harry A. Chester, who many of you might remember as the publisher of a host of Golden Age comics such as Dynamic, Major Victory, and Punch. The occasion was a graduation ceremony, and the class was from the Joe Kubrick School of Cartoon Art. Of the near 100 students that attended the institute at one level or another, 17 were about to receive their diplomas. The air was thick and rich with excitement as the once-in-a-lifetime moment approached. Their names were called, and the young artists responded. Their faces bright with the knowledge that school was out. Childhood had officially ended. Careers were about to begin. I knew the feeling, relived it with them. Aside me, Harry Chester, watching the parade of eager talent pass by, surveying it in much the same way he undoubtedly had done for over 40 years when he was one of the men who created and shaped the comic business. The students were well aware, too, that they would be carrying on a tradition that was almost a half-century old. Their awkward self-confidence and playful arrogance was pleasant to see. They needed to both stay on their chosen course. They need both to stay on their chosen course. I placed myself somewhere in the middle of the two extremes and secretly adopted their commencement for one that I had never had. Then again, I never felt I needed one. Or was that simply the justification of a streetwise philosophy? Their swagger and spirit took me back to a time when I was in a similar position. I was 17. I hadn't yet graduated from high school due to a peculiar circumstance. It wasn't that I was expelled. They just didn't let me back into school one day. Doing my best not to keep out of trouble, but not being too successful at it, I found myself spending time at the YMCA. This particular morning, right in the middle of the weightlifting routine, one of the local street corner athletes happened to mention the fact that a new newspaper was in the process of establishing a full-scale operation just a few blocks away. The editors of the paper in the city had given me the keep practicing kid routine for years, but what did they know? Here was a new outfit that was seeking out fresh blood, and mine was as fresh as any they had found. I phoned to make an appointment and apply for a position of staff artist. The girl who answered the switchboard recognized my voice. We had worked together for a year or two earlier in one of my magic illusion acts. Jim Steranko was a magician and an escape artist. Sorry, side commentary. Where the fuck was I? She said I was too late, that the job had been filled. I had her connect me with the artist. He told me the job had been filled. The conversation ended at that point, but not the idea. I broke the routine, showered, and went home and hastily assembled my portfolio of art. Within 1 hour, I was in the newspaper's office confronting their staff artists. I told you, we have no place for you here, he said. I dropped my portfolio on his desk. How do you know? You haven't even seen my work yet. He looked at me, shook his head, and laughed, and he hired me. He had never even looked at my work. He just said that anyone that wanted to get into the art business that badly was going to do it one way or the other, and it might as well be with him then. I assisted him for about 3 years, during which I learned the foundation of the advertising art business. That was my school, and I graduated when I walked out of the situation. Then I retired for a few years on the money I had earned. Retired, yes. Stopped working, no. During this period, I began to develop new ideas that would eventually blossom into the parallel careers. I began to apply the things that I had learned in my apprenticeships. One of them was so proficient at what you do. One of them was so proficient at what you do that no one can afford not to hire you, just to keep you away from the competition. Just to keep you away from the competition. Fuck. I'm fucking up on here. I'll keep going. It was a standard I aimed for in my work. It still is. I'm going to reread that paragraph because If that's what the standard is that Jim Steranko is living by, I think it bears rereading. Come on, man. During this period, I began to develop new ideas that would eventually blossom into parallel careers. I began to apply the things I had learned in my apprenticeship. One of them was, be so proficient at what you do that no one can afford not to hire you, just to keep you away from the competition. It was the standard I aimed for in my work. It still is. I had learned that success depended on more than just talent. There were a score of other factors involved, timing, luck, opportunity, but one was infinitely more important than the others: determination. And that was something I was born with. In a way, it's like imagination. It can't be taught. It can only be developed. Call it self-control, tenacity, discipline. It's all the same. And it's as critical to an artist as his eyes, especially a commercial artist who works in a competitive field. While polishing my ideas and my philosophy, I padded my bank book by painting signs. I had only one steady account, a grocery chain that required a 25-cent new sign a week. It took an evening to produce them. As the money began to run out and boredom began to set in, I decided to go back to work and again turn to commercial art. It was almost an on-the-spot resolution. I scanned a phone book and found the nearest printer, culled some samples of my work, and simply walked in off the street. In my experience, I learned that printers can always use reliable help. This one was no different. There was a spot for me, but we couldn't come to terms financially until suitable determination was applied. My final offer was irresistible. Put me on for a week. If I don't make $150 for you within that time, you owe me nothing. If I do, start me on a salary of $75 a week. I worked for 4 years. During that time, I learned most of what I know about printing and reproduction, process, type composition, camera work, plate making, binding, and dozens of other techniques that have given me an edge over my competition for the last decade or two. There's nothing like learning on the job. It's like going to school and getting paid for it too. When I had gone as far as I could in that operation, I bowed out. I was ready for something new, perhaps a public relations position. I was on talking terms with one PR counselor I had gotten to know through his business with the printer. What I didn't know then about PR men is that they're never in the offices, and 5 visits produced nothing. I played pool a lot during the day and made music at night with an endless string of rock bands. Then a particular thing happened. I received a call from the PR man. He had been trying to reach me for weeks, but could never catch me, probably because I was trying to find him. Without knowing, I had been attempting to offer my services to him, and he came up with a similar proposal. Was I interested in the position of art director for a new advertising agency he was establishing? The coincidence almost raised the hair on the back of my neck. To refuse would have been throwing all reason in the face of fate. The opportunities were greater than ever before. So were the responsibilities. I accepted and subsequently turned out some of the finest work I'd ever done. 4 years later, I was out seeking other direction in which to channel my efforts. One direction was film animation. Another was the comics. Almost by accident, I created a handful of superheroes for the Harveys in the mid-'60s. They liked my writing, but not my art. I went elsewhere and developed a complete book of Tower. They rejected it. I was back down to the streets. Archie Comics wanted me to design their superhero covers. Murray Blotniff asked me to write for him at DC. I was determined to make my own deal and wound up in Stan Lee's office at Marvel. Remember I said about being so good they couldn't afford not to hire you? They were almost Stan's very words. What he said was, "Your work is primitive but exciting, Steranko. You're too good to let get away. What book do you want to do for us?" It was easy as that. The rest is history. After comics came paperback book covers, then super graphics, the history of comics and media scene. What's ahead? It would only be a guess. What's ahead? It would only be a guess, just as it is for the 17 graduates of the Kurt Kubert School. My immediate hope was that they had learned the lesson of determination, the discipline that would keep them alive during the struggle ahead. During the graduation dinner, I discovered some had already found a market for their skills in animation, in advertising, yes, and even in comics. The future would be safe, the good guys would win. The graduation dinner was over, and the camaraderie of the past few years would soon diminish under the weight of the adventures that were ahead. The parking lot began to empty as the last grins flashed their goodbye. See you, Joe. Take care, Miro. Good night, Harry. Jim Steranko.